Hey guys, Stealth here. I wanted to show you this 10v10 support deck. It's a US national deck, and I'm only using this deck in cases where I'm playing in a 10v10 match. On lower amount of players in a game, it probably wouldn't do as good because it doesn't have a lot of offensive capabilities. This deck is purely based on an AA situation. I'm supporting my teammates in their anti-air defense so that they can bring in more offensive units. So you're going to be seeing this deck as a bit of a weird thing because it has a lot of logistics and a lot of support, and of course that's what the support category excels at. Now, one thing I do in a support deck is bring in a lot of command vehicles so that other players don't have to. So for this I'm bringing in 7 Humvees. I like these a little better than the standard command jeeps because they have a lot more speed, off-road and on-road. They don't have armor, they do have a Browning, but you're never going to be using these, and I get 7 of these, so I can capture quite a bit of sectors for my allies. Next, I'm using 2 cards of CH-53s. These can bring in a lot of supplies, and one of the roles of the support deck is to keep each other supplied. Keep other players keep other players in the fight, keep them going, and make sure their units have enough ammo and supplies to keep going. So that's why I have both 2 cards of CH-53s and a group of Super Chinooks. So I have a bit of flexibility there. Now I also have 2 FOBs, and I'm using these to keep my helicopters supplied. I have 2 of them also to keep my artillery firing and to possibly be able to resupply other units. Next I have 1 card of Hammets, High Expanded Mobility Tactical Truck. These things carry a lot of supplies. In the last game I played with this deck, I didn't actually use them because the game was so big, or the map was so big, that I didn't need these things. But for a supply truck, or for any off-road vehicle actually, they have a very nice speed, 100 kph. That's even faster than the Humvee, which only goes 90 off-road. So something as small as this goes slower off-road than something as big as this. And then finally I have a command tank. This was more of a unit I brought in. I brought it into the deck just because I could, not because I really need it. I could of course go for something like the LAV, which has some armor, or go for a cheaper command tank or something like that. But right now I decided to bring this in. I haven't actually used it in a game yet, but it will give me some heavy armor in case I need it. Now in the infantry category I barely have any choice. I got stingers, I got assault engineers, light riflemen and riflemen. That's all I'm getting. Since this deck is focused heavily on AA, I'm using 7 stingers per card, and I'm using 2 cards of these. I bring them in Humvees because 10v10 maps tend to be very big, and Humvees give you the best speed, both off-road and on-road. So these units can really quickly get to their destination, get into a forest or a town, and from there take out any air threat. My riflemen and light riflemen are there to protect them, so I'm using 18 of these at trained. Should be more than enough because my allies can also help with taking or defending a town, and I'm probably not going to be on the front line anyway. These guys are for close-in fighting with their close-range ATGM or AT weapon. And these have an ATGM which has a bit better range, 1925. AP power is horrible at 15, or maybe horrible is a bit much. It's not that good against tanks. You're gonna need a couple of shots of these. In the last game I played I never actually used these guys, but I could have. Now the support category, and this is where the deck really excels. This is where you get your points from. I have 2 paladin units. I have 2 of these so I can get a bit more fire quicker on a position. These things have a good rate of fire. They take quite short to aim compared to other artillery units. Good dispersion, decent HE power, and they have 35 shells, so they don't really need to be next to an FOB. But since they fire 4 rounds a minute, you do generally keep them next to an FOB to keep them supplied. Now, and this is where the AA deck really shines. This is the Patriot, of course. I'm using 2 cards of these guys. 4 missiles each, So that gives me 16 missiles if I bring them all in. They take up a lot of supplies, and that's why I have so many supply units in my logistics category. These things have a very high range, 5.5 kilometers, 70% accuracy, and I'm using these in groups of 2 so that they will generally always take down a plane. They are, however, very expensive, 120 points, and they cannot shoot at helicopters, so make sure that if you want to use these guys, you have them protected. And for the protection for these things, I have the Chaparrals, I have the Pivats, and the Avengers. Now, first off, the Chaparrals. These are mostly helicopter killers. Decent platform, 110 km on-road speed, 60 kph off-road, which is still pretty good. No armor. But what I like about them is their good range against helicopters, 3,300 meters. And they carry 12 missiles, which is really a nice number. You don't need to babysit these guys as much as, for example, a cheaper Chaparral, which only... Oh, sorry, they changed that. Other AA units sometimes come with less AA missiles, so you need to babysit those more and get more supplies in. Next, I have the M270. These are situational artillery units. Don't use these against infantry because they'll do absolutely nothing against them but shock them. You want to use these things against stationary targets. They are incredibly accurate, 910 meters, which is, as far as I can recall, the most accurate artillery unit in the game. The problem is that they take forever to aim and even longer to reload. So the problem with these things is that they are very situational. You have to have something that's absolutely standing still, because they're not good on anything on the move unless you can accurately predict where they're going to go. Once they do fire, and especially at an expensive AA unit or a tank or a group of units, they can quickly earn themselves back. So it's up to you whether you'd like to have these things in the deck. Next, I'm using 7 Pivats. These are of course also helicopter units, and I use these in tandem with the Chaparral. In case the Chaparral goes empty, I can have a Pivats at that location to relieve or cover the Chaparral while it's reloading. And these things have a lot less range against helicopters than the Chaparral. Chaparral has 3,325. This thing only has 625, but its rate of fire is very good. Accuracy is good, and it's all around a good platform for only 40 points. Next, another group of Chaparrals. We already discussed these. And then there's the Avenger. These things are very nice AA jeeps, mostly helicopter defense. Very cheap, 45 points. Cannot be targeted by seaplanes, which is a very good benefit. And if you compare that to the Pivats, these things can, because they use a radar. So if you want to use these, make sure you turn off their AA or their weapons when they're not firing at anything, so that they cannot be targeted. The Avenger does not have that problem. It's very mobile, 90 kph off-road, 150 on-road, because it's just a modified Humvee. And these Stingers are of course the same Stingers as the infantry is using, but the platform is a lot more mobile. I use these things in forests and to cover convoys, to make sure that the convoy can arrive without being harassed by helicopters. So I got quite a varied AA defense here. I got Patriots for long-range plane defense, I got Chaparral's long-range helicopter defense, short-range helicopter defense in the form of the Avengers, and something in between using the Pivats. Next up is the tanks. You don't really get a lot of tanks for the support deck, because they're really not used to using tanks. They're there to support other players using artillery and AA, and that's all they're good at. So the best tank you really get is the M60A3 Patton or the MBT-70. Now this is actually quite a good tank, but you don't get that many of them. You get 13 trained or 9 hardened. Still, I'd recommend using these things, or at least having them in your deck, so that if you need them, they're there. At least you have some firepower, you can do some damage to tanks. But mostly these things are to be used against vehicles, IFVs, APCs, stuff like that. In the Recon tab, I have a Kiowa. This is my main scout helicopter, and it's the only scout helicopter that the Americans can bring in their support deck. I have an ACAV, which is an armored tank, an armored scout vehicle. And I believe that this is the same tank that was recently introduced in World of Tanks in the form of the T-49. And I like this thing because it has some armor, so it can take some hits. It has medium stealth, which is exceptional for a tank. And it has good optics, very good off-road speed. And this gun is very good against pretty much anything. Mostly, of course, infantry. Not so good against tanks because it only has 11 AP power. But it can go through vehicles, and with an 8 rate of fire it's decent. The only thing I dislike about it is the accuracy of only 30%, and do not even think about firing this thing on the move. Stabilizer 15% is just not good. Next I have cavalry scouts. I would like to bring in scouts, especially scout infantry, in a helicopter. So I could swap these out for rangers, which do actually come in a Chinook. But I have never actually used cavalry scouts, so I had these in more out of curiosity than out of anything else. And I'm bringing them in a Humvee because it's the most mobile platform out of these options. Next, in the vehicle tab, I have some more punching power. And of course it's not exactly as good as a tank, but these comvats are very, very nice weapons. They have a very good autocannon, which is the comvat autocannon, that's how they got their name. The platform is more or less a Bradley, I believe. And they have good armor for a vehicle, very high accuracy, good AP power for an autocannon. And they can be used effectively against vehicles, infantry and helicopters with their 1500 meter range. Of course, if I'm using the deck correctly, these will never even see a helicopter up close, because my Avengers or my 163s will already take those out. Next up is the M728 CEV, which is the combat engineer's vehicle. If you put these things up against an infantry unit out in the open, they will do horrible, horrible things to them. They have a very, very high HE power gun. Not exactly accurate, 25%. But for 45 points you get 13 frontal armor, very high HE power gun. And if you use groups of 2 of these, I found that they can take out pretty much any infantry in the open. Kill lighter vehicles and stun medium to heavy tanks. For tank killing I have both the LAV AT. I'm using these things more in a long standoff role, and the Humvee in a short range assassination role. These have of course a bit better AP power than the LAV AT, but I'm using both of these because the LAV AT at least has some armor and it carries a bit more missiles, so that's a bit nicer than the Humvee. Of course they're only 45 and 50 points, so they're very cheap. If you want to have something, an AT platform which is a bit more expensive, you could go for the ITV, which is a more armored version of the LAV. It's just a different chassis they're using it on. I have heard people use the Ontos, the recoilless rifle carrier. I don't have these in this deck, but if you feel like you want to have it, of course just feel free and swap it out. Next, in the helicopter category, not a lot of variety again. Unfortunately, I would have really liked to have an Apache here, because that would give me a lot of punching power. Unfortunately, I don't have those. What I do have are hogs, both the heavy hogs or the standard hogs with rocket pods. Instead, I'm using little birds. These come with twin grenade launchers. Very good range against infantry, and that's mostly all they're good at. They have an incredible rate of fire. And just imagine these things as the flying version of the LVTP-7A1, which is the Marines vehicle. Use them against infantry that's in forests and in the open, and these will quickly wipe out any infantry group. Next I have 14 of these OH-58CS, flying Stinger helicopters mostly. I haven't used them yet in this deck, because my AA on other fronts is usually a lot safer. But you can use these things early on in the game, try and counter a helo rush, so especially if you're up against an airborne deck, this is really useful. Now in my plane section I have planes which are mostly good at supporting others or doing assassinations. So I'm going to start off with the Raven. and as far as I'm concerned, this is the best seaplane in the game. You can compare these things with the Prowler, which is another option that the Americans have, or the Wild Weasel. Let's go for the Prowler first. Let's see, here it is. The Prowlers have less ECM, less speed. They have a lesser missile on them. This is the standard AGM-78D. These come with the harms, which are fire and forgets, same as these guys, but they have more range, better accuracy. So that's why I'm using the Raven over the Prowlers. Of course, you could also decide to take the Wild Weasel, but that's an even worse platform than the Prowler. Let's see, here's the Raven. They come with the Shrike missile. Very lowish range, because this is actually in range of some of the AA platforms they're going to be firing at, while the Raven can stay out of range. 40% ECM versus 60%, so I'm definitely using the Raven. Next, I'm using the Nighthawk, and I'm using these guys purely because I can assassinate stuff with them. I can use these guys to try and get some infantry, try and get a command vehicle, try to get anti-air units, or even artillery if I can manage to sneak behind enemy lines that far. And especially with their upgrade, when they have the 2 bombs, which is now the case since the patch, you can use these things to take out heavy tanks such as super heavies, and that will make them earn themselves back for 150 points very, very quickly. Next up is the F-15D. This gives me some bombing capability. 4th 1000 kilogram bombs are very good against infantry, vehicles, and even medium tanks. They can be used as AA fighters if you'd really want to. They're not as good against it, but they're still decent, and they're excelling at anti-helicopter warfare. Next up, FA-18A. This is the cheaper of the 2 Hornets. I have used these things, and now that I'm thinking about it, I'm actually going to swap these out for the better Hornet. The problem with the standard Hornet is that the standard Hornet only has a semi-active missile, and these guys have fire and forget. So these guys need to see their target all the way to the point of impact. These guys can fire the missile and just fly off again, which makes them their survivability a bit better. And finally, I have the F-16C Block 52, purely a air superiority fighter, and this is all they're good at, and they do that very, very well. Low turn radius, very good air detection, exceptional, decent ECM, of course the standard Vulcan on them, good anti-air missiles, AIM-9s, short range against helicopters, very good accuracy on those, and 4 MRAM long range anti-air missiles, 60% accuracy, which is very good. And I have 2 of these trained, so that if I have a lot of points to spend, I can get 2 of these in and dominate the airspace. So that's the AA deck. I hope you like it. If you do, feel free to copy it. The deck code is in the description. I've also played a game with this deck just to see if it's viable in a 10 versus 10 game, and you can find a video or link to that video down in the description below. If you like this video, please hit like. If you have any suggestions for changes in this deck, please let me know in the comments below. And if you want to see more of my videos, just subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you in another video.